Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining today's Qesher presentation. My name is Dora. I'm joining you from Budapest. And you can also find here Sebastian also joining from Budapest. Is the two of us who started this project 6 years ago now. And just very briefly, I'll introduce ourselves and Qesher. So those of you who are joining us for the first time have an idea about what we do. So our aim and mission is to shed light on Jewish culture, Jewish history, and the present day situation of different Jewish communities from all over the world. So in our regular events, we do virtual tours, lectures, talks about different cities or countries, Jewish heritage, Jewish culture, present day life. We also have a book club series, which is what we're doing today. Today is a Qesher book club. We started this series because we realized that there are so many authors who write about Jewish life around the world, Jewish culture, different Jewish themed topics of the diaspora and related themes that we decided to create this platform in which they can introduce their books and bring awareness about what kind of Jewish literature is out there today. So I'm very happy to welcome today Zalman Newfield, or Schnur Zalman Newfield, as his whole name is, who grew up in Crown Heights in Brooklyn, in the heart of the ultra-Orthodox Lubavitch Jewish community. In his early 20s, he left this world in search of secular education and new opportunities and experiences, eventually earning a PhD in sociology from New York University. His memoir, Brooklyn Odyssey, My Journey Out of Hasidism, candidly recounts his personal journey, while his academic book, Degrees of Separation, Identity Formation While Leaving Ultra-Orthodox Judaism, examines others who have left similar communities. He also hosts for the New Book Network podcast, where he interviews scholars across a wide range of disciplines. Today, we're going to focus on his book, Brooklyn Odyssey, and I am going to interview him, have a conversation with him about this book. And then, of course, after this interview, you're also welcome to ask your own questions. So you're welcome to put your questions in the chat. Just because we've had some experience in the past that we know that the Chabad Lubavitch topic may be a bit sensitive for certain people, or people have very different experiences with this community. Some may be positive, some may be negative. We just like to ask to be here with curiosity and your open mind, and please just ask questions that are in that spirit and be respectful of others in our virtual room who may have different feelings about the topic than you do. So this is just a little request from the beginning. So, but now let's focus on Zalman and your book. So I thought that was very interesting for me to read in your book, uh, is that I think many people, and maybe I also had this image of someone leaving an ultra-Orthodox community that is kind of like a one moment, kind of a decision that is being made on the day. Like, I've had enough, I decided to leave. But I think what is beautiful in your book is how you show this journey from the very early days, the very early seeds, until you finally make this decision. And even after the decision, you still discuss how you're feeling, what your relationship is to the community and to yourself and to your Jewishness in general. So just for those who haven't read the book, would you give us a bit of a glimpse of this journey that you speak about?
Sure. So, first of all, thank you so much for having me. And it's so lovely to see people from all different states throughout America and countries around the world joining us today. And for me, just to take a moment, this is a really meaningful forum to have a conversation about my book because, as the title implies, a Brooklyn Odyssey, it's a big part of the journey of my spiritual and religious and personal evolution was connected to travel. I had spent time, I grew up in the Crown Heights section in Brooklyn, the heartland of the Lubavitch Hasidic community. But as many people know, there are Lubavitch communities all around the world, and Lubavitch is involved in what they call Jewish outreach, trying to bring non-Orthodox Jews closer to the Orthodox Jewish tradition. And so there's outposts of individual rabbis and their wives all around the world, and there are also established Lubavitch communities throughout North America, in Europe, in South America, in Israel, and so on. And so part of my experience growing up in the Lubavitch community was traveling to various yeshivas, various religious schools, and being a part of several Jewish communities throughout the world. So I spent time in various yeshivas throughout America, in Chicago and in Florida for several years. And then I spent a year in Argentina and Buenos Aires, and I spent a year in Singapore as a Lubavitch emissary helping out the small Jewish community there. So it's really very special for me to be speaking at one time to an audience of Jews from all around the world. And I think this kind of highlights my own experiences and how global, in a sense, they were, and how this mirrors the a key feature of the Lubavitch Hasidic community, that it is a global community. I mean, of course, there are Jewish people in general living all around the world, but there are also Lubavitch communities all around the world involved in Lubavitch outreach activities. And it's just really special to be here.
Thank you so much. We're also very happy that you're here. And do you want to share a bit about your book and how you describe this journey that you go through in the book?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, a really key part of my research as an academic, I'm a sociologist by training. A big part of my understanding of the experience of people leaving the ultra-Orthodox community, which I talk about, I explore at length in my first book, my academic book, Degrees of Separation, highlights the fact that this is a very long process, that there's a tremendous amount of pressure within the community to keep people in the community and to prevent people from leaving. And then there's also external barriers to people leaving. For instance, as in my case and many other people in the Hasidic community, we received little or no secular education. And so, coming from that environment, trying to integrate into the mainstream, let's say, American society has profound challenges. And so it's a very long process. And in my memoir, Brooklyn Odyssey, I try to highlight just how tortuous the process was, both because of the fears I had about how the community would respond, how my parents, how my friends, my family would respond to my religious evolution, as well as these kind of larger social barriers that exist, you know, to trying to integrate from a very socially and intellectually isolated community.
Yeah, and I think it's very interesting to read all these points. You started speaking a bit about Chabad in general and how it's a global community and basically it's everywhere. So everyone has some sort of idea or prejudice or thoughts or opinions about Chabad. So in your experience, what are these? What do people in general have as their understanding or misunderstanding of this community?
Right. So it's interesting. I was a part of the Lubavitch community for several decades. I was involved, as I mentioned, in Lubavitch outreach activities, going all around the world, but always very much from the inside. And then as I started to make my journey out of the Lubavitch community and I started to meet more and more non-Orthodox Jews in the course of my daily life, not trying to persuade them to be more orthodox as I had done previously, but just people who turned out to be my classmates, my colleagues. Eventually, I joined non-Orthodox synagogues. They were my synagogue, friends, and I realized that Lubavitch has many people, as you said, have ideas about what Lubavitch is. And I think that for some people, they have a very negative view and they look at Lubavitch in a very kind of harsh light. But in my experience, at least, most non-Orthodox Jews that I met, and a fair number of non-Jews as well, tended to have a very positive view. And in some cases, even sort of overly positive. In other words, not only willing to acknowledge the kind of positive things that Lubavitch does, but also maybe overlook some of its shortcomings. So, for example, in terms of the positive things, anyone who's traveled at all as a Jew who wanted to find a synagogue in the town or city or country that they were visiting, Lubavitch is tremendously helpful. If you're trying to find a kosher meal, if you're trying to find a welcoming face in a foreign city or a country, Lubavitch could be a tremendous asset. I've even heard of non-Orthodox Jews who use the Chabad list of synagogues all around the world as a kind of travel guide. They say, well, where should we travel next to, honey? Okay, let's look where do they have a Chabad rabbi. And they use Chabad as a kind of home away from home, a place where you could connect with other Jews, you could feel a sense of kinship across religious denominational lines, maybe language barriers, and so on. And that could be a very meaningful thing for a lot of Jews. And in my memoir, I talk about my experience as a Lubavitch emissary going to various countries around the world to do Lubavitch Jewish outreach. And for example, when I was in Beijing in China, I was the kind of like a assistant rabbi, a temporary rabbi, while the actual official rabbi, had to go away for the summer. And me and my a friend of mine who I call Alter in the book, we ran the services every Shabbat, every Saturday. I arranged, I cooked the meals. So we had kosher meals for guests who wanted to come for the Shabbat and enjoy a kosher meal. And people told us that this was a phenomenal thing for them, that they're traveling around Asia and suddenly they're able to be in Beijing and have a taste of home, so to speak. And so I think a lot of non-Orthodox Jews may not be especially focused on the theology within the Lubavitch community and what exactly they believe about God and the Torah, the Bible, or for that matter, there's a lot of controversy there was for decades now about whether the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the spiritual leader of the Lubavitch community, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who passed away in 1994, whether he was the Messiah, Jewish Messiah, whether he is the Messiah, whether he's going to come back and usher in the messianic redemption for the world, and I think most non-Orthodox Jews, this is really not a big concern of theirs. They say, well, whatever Rabbi Schneerson's messianic status is sort of a non-issue for us. We're going to the synagogue because we feel welcome, and they don't charge dues. They don't ask questions about if we believe in God or do we keep kosher or are we married to a Jewish spouse or whatever it is. They just welcome us, and so we're happy to be there. And I think that that's often the way that non-Orthodox Jews approach Chabad. And I think that Chabad is very happy to be approached in that way.
Thank you. And what you started by saying that most people see the positive, but then they overlook some of the shortcomings. Do you want to share a bit about that as well?
Well, I was just alluding to the fact that the Lubavitch community, excuse me, is an ultra Orthodox community, and they fundamentally believe the same kind of things that other ultra Orthodox Jews believe. In other words, excuse me, I think there's often an impression that because the Chabad rabbi or Rebbitzin, the wife of the rabbi, on the particular college campus that someone is a part of, or at the rabbi of a synagogue in some city that you're visiting, because they're welcoming and they say, "Oh yes, sure, come in the door, sit down. We're so happy to have you." That means that they don't believe the same kinds of things that other ultra-Orthodox Jews tend to believe. Again, whether it's about the nature of God or the nature of the Bible or their attitudes towards the LGBTQ community or questions about the status of women in religious spaces and what kinds of things women are able to do in religious spaces or not. There's just many, many issues that ultra-Orthodox Jews have very different views from their more liberal brothers and sisters. But I think that Lubavitch often, outsiders don't necessarily realize that Lubavitchers tend to have similar views on all these and many other issues. But because they present a very welcoming um, face to any newcomer, that gets ignored.
Thank you. Now a bit back to your journey. You mentioned very briefly that there's little secular education in the yeshivas where children study. And I find it fascinating how you kind of on your own, almost on your own, discover secular books and how much you ended up reading. And basically, I think of that as the first step towards understanding more of the world. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that really felt like that in your book. So I was just curious, like, what were the books, or if there's one book in particular that stands out for you that kind of had a larger than the normal impact on you.
Sure. So you could maybe see behind me, I have a bunch of books, and this only captures a tiny fraction of my home library. I'm looking in my living room, and there's bookcases. It's literally the the wall space all around the living room is stuffed with bookcases. My wife is also has a PhD and is a scholar, and so we're kind of in this together. Um, we're kind of obsessed with books. The truth is that in my case, just to clarify, it's not that I didn't receive much secular education. In my case, I did not receive any secular education because I went to the first school I went to in Crown Heights in Brooklyn was Ahalei Torah, the Tents of Torah, which is housed in the old Brooklyn Jewish Center for anyone who's familiar with New York or Brooklyn Jewish history. This building was a very important um, institution for sort of more liberal form of Judaism. It was established in the early 1900s, but by the 1960s, 1970s, due to white flight, the demographic within Crown Heights had changed drastically, and the population of Jews who used to support that institution radically declined, and eventually the Lubavitch movement took it over and turned it into the flagship boys' day school. And so when I came around in the 1980s and early 1990s, I was a student at that school, and that school did not provide any secular education whatsoever, and it still does not. It did not teach us the ABCs. It did not teach us basic arithmetic, nothing whatsoever. And so for me, definitely, I had a sense that I was missing out, that I wasn't informed about kind of what's going on around me. I was, my early teens. I mean, I was very young. I didn't have a kind of fully formed sense of this, but I definitely started to have a sense that there was a much bigger world beyond the confines of my community, and I wanted to learn about it. And I felt like I needed to learn how to read English. And so my uncle Jeff, my mother's brother, played a critical role. He actually gave me a second grade English workbook that helped me take the tiny bit of knowledge I had about the ABCs. I knew what all the letters were, but I wasn't sure quite how to put them all together. And so when I was 14, 15, I started to on this journey of English literacy. And it really stuck. I started with this English workbook, and then very soon after, I started to read English children's books. And so you say which particular books? It's not one book, but there was a series that was very pivotal for me. It's called the Great Illustrated Series. And the reason why it's called the Great Illustrated Series is because they take classic texts like White Fang, Ivanhoe, The Three Musketeers, things like that, and they rewrite it in a simple form for children, and every other page is illustration. So you only have to read half the amount of text in order to complete the book, which when I was 15, 16, that was a tremendous boon. So I got my hands on copies of some of these books, and I was just captivated. Every story was enthralling. It was such an exciting thing to learn about other people from other walks of life and different periods of literature. And after 6 months, a year of reading children's books, I started to read books for adults. And shortly thereafter, I read Alexander Solzhenitsyn's The Gulag Archipelago and Lucy Dawidowitz's War Against the Jews. So kind of light reading. And that introduced me to adult, books. And ever since then, I haven't been able to kick the habit.
And other than books, you also mention a lot of experiences of travel, which you now briefly mentioned. You've been to Russia and Beijing and China and Singapore and even Ghana, if I remember correctly. Uh, so that's another way of course, experiencing so much of the world, like not only written, but actually meeting people and experiencing these other cultures. So what would you share some moments from these travels or something that really made you feel differently about
I'm gonna
things or
go
look at things
around because I'll never
differently?
get out of
Oh, sorry. Please, everyone, make sure to mute yourselves. Thank you.
Right, right. So yeah, I mean, there were many important moments for me in my travels, but I think the most important thing about the travels was that the way that we were supposed to do it as good Lubavitchers was that we were supposed to go from, from headquarters, so to speak, from Crown Heights or whatever kind of established Lubavitch community we were part of. We were supposed to go from there out into the world and try to influence non-Orthodox Jews to be more involved in the Orthodox Jewish tradition. And in other words, from the a kind of Lubavitch doctrinal perspective, the relationship between the Lubavitch emissary and the non-Orthodox Jew we were encountering was supposed to be unidirectional. We were supposed to influence them. It wasn't supposed to be blowback. We weren't supposed to, in turn, get influenced by the people that we were encountering and the places that we were visiting. But that's exactly what happened to me. That as much as I tried to be a good Lubavitcher, I tried to tell the people I met all the things I had learned growing up in Lubavitch, all the wisdom of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, all of the insights from Orthodox Judaism. At the same time, I always was at least as fascinated, if not more, by the people that I met and their lives and what they were doing. And this was especially the case when I met a young woman in Singapore who was actually a Jewish woman and was a professor of sociology in Singapore National University. And we became close friends. And I was just riveted by everything that she said. I was amazed that she knew so much. She had read so many books in literature and history and philosophy and the physical sciences. And we used to have these really long and wonderful conversations where I felt like for the first time I was being introduced to all sorts of disciplines and topics that I never knew about, but always had some inkling that these things were out there. And suddenly I was able to actually learn about them firsthand. And it was a very exciting experience. In fact, one day I actually went to a class of hers. She was teaching a sociology course at the university, and I visited her class. And that was a particularly powerful moment because I had toyed with the idea of going to college for years, but it always seemed like a faraway dream, like not something that people like me actually did, people who weren't taught the ABCs, people whose community forbids them from going to college. And suddenly I was sitting in this classroom and I just looked around. There were all these students who were roughly my age. And I just felt like, oh, maybe this is something that I actually could do. And then, a year or so after that, I started going to college when I returned to the United States.
Thank you. And just because in Qesher, our main top or basically our general topic is to discuss the different ways people can be Jewish. I found it really fascinating how also you write about the local communities you encountered. For example, in Singapore, you realized that there were Sephardic Jews. I don't know if you want to share any experience of that or or a Yemenite Jew in Beijing, that how was that for you to realize that there are so many other ways to be Jewish than what you've been taught?
Yes, so that was a really important thing, and definitely it was very meaningful to meet Jews from not just different religious backgrounds, but also different sort of ethnic backgrounds. And at the same time, and this is part of the issue about growing up in a Lubavitch community and even being involved in Jewish outreach. Throughout the world. When we went to Singapore, for example, the Singapore Jewish community is a Sephardic community. Most of the it's an established community that's been there for over 100 years. They came to the Sephardic Jews came mostly from Iraq. With the British when Singapore was a British colony, and they had their own traditions, their own customs, both as Sephardic Jews, but also I think just being in Singapore and they developed their own particular flavor of Judaism. But as a Lubavitcher who was sent to Singapore to help the Jewish community there, we definitely thought of like our approach to the community was very much how can we get them to do things the way we do them? So, for example, in the Lubavitch community, especially in the yeshivas, the religious schools for boys that I had attended, it was a custom Friday night during the prayer service. All of the young men would dance around the bima, the middle of the synagogue, and sing Hasidic songs. So because we were in the synagogue Friday night, it didn't, in a sense, matter to us that this was a Sephardic community, that they may have their own traditions. We were going to do our tradition. So we started to dance in the middle of the L'Chadodi prayer on Friday night during the Friday night services. Well, guess what? Some of the members of the community were very upset about this. They understood perfectly well that this was a kind of Hasidic import into their community, and they didn't like it. They were very proud of their Sephardic heritage and wanted to celebrate their Sephardic heritage. But definitely at the time, I was kind of oblivious to all of this and didn't really understand what's the big deal. This is what we do. Why won't they just go along with it? Why are they making things difficult? It was only later as I reflected on this and I realized that this was really an imposition that we as Ashkenazic, Hasidic Jews were imposing on this Sephardic community. And we also had our own surprises along these lines. So within the Ashkenazic tradition, people may be familiar, there's this idea of kitniot, of certain foods that we don't eat on the Passover. For example, beans and rice, corn, things like that, that are thought of as things that might be confused with other grains like wheat that are strictly forbidden on Passover. So in the Ashkenazic community, we don't eat kitniot. Um, it turns out that Sephardic Jews don't abide by this ruling. So when me and my friends were in Singapore over Passover, helping out at the communal Seder in the synagogue in Singapore, while the dinner was being served, we saw these heaping plates of rice being offered to the congregants. And one of my friends, who was one of the rabbinical students who I went to Singapore with, was horrified that this was going on. And he jumped up and he started to scream, "What's going on here? This is not acceptable on Passover." And he was quickly informed that according to the Sephardic tradition, this is perfectly acceptable. These Jews are Sephardic and they eat rice on Passover. And so he made a quick adjustment and he made a public announcement. For anyone who's Sephardic, they could eat the rice that is being served. But anyone who's Ashkenazi, they should absolutely not eat the rice. So this is just an example of how the different Jewish communities have different traditions, and it's really important to acknowledge those differences and celebrate them, but that's not always the way that these differences have been treated.
Thank you. And I'll ask a few questions about your family and your original family and also your new family, because I think that's also an important background. And then we'll open up for Q&A. I see there are many questions coming in. So first of all, what I found very interesting is that you share that your parents actually were they chose this life. They were Choser B'Tshuva, if I say it correctly. So they decided to, even though they had a secular education and a secular or liberal background, they decided to become Chabad Lubavitch. So how do you think that influenced your upbringing or your decisions later in life, or maybe even access to Uncle Jeff and his books? And like how did that shape your life that they were Balei Tshuva?
Sure. So I think it shaped my life profoundly. So the interesting thing is that even though I knew my whole life that my parents were Baalei Tshuva, that they were quote unquote returnees. They were born Jewish but not Orthodox, and they chose as adults independently, the two of them separately, chose to join the Lubavitch community. So I was aware of that my whole life, and I was aware that we had most of our relatives, my parents' siblings and cousins and aunts and uncles, were not Orthodox as as a result of this. So I knew of this kind of status that we had. At the same time, I didn't like think about it so much because my parents, once they joined the Lubavitch community, were deeply committed to the mission of the Lubavitch community, to living by the teachings of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, for example, making sure that their sons did not get a secular education, but also many other things. So I just want to emphasize that some people hear about my story and they say, oh, maybe Zalman was never really a part of the Lubavitch community, so it's not surprising that he left or something. That's very much not the case. I was very much, me and all my siblings were very much brought up within the heart of the Lubavitch community and were deeply committed to the Lubavitch mission and the Lubavitch way of life. At the same time, thinking back now, it's clear to me that having all of these non-Orthodox relatives, including my Uncle Jeff, but many other loving relatives that we would visit on a sort of semi-regular basis, I think that it definitely shaped my thinking. So I think that for some people who grew up in the ultra Orthodox community who didn't have any relatives that were outside of it, the idea of leaving may seem completely impossible. Like how could anyone do this? They can't really imagine life beyond the boundaries of their Hasidic community. But for me, although it was still a very daunting task leaving the community, I think it was made a little bit more manageable because on some level I had an awareness that there were relatives who I loved, who I was close to, who were outside the community, and that they might try to help me in some way with this journey. So I think it was an important thing, but definitely growing up in the Lubavitch community, I didn't feel like, oh, we're not quite in it. We were very much in it.
Yeah, and I think what is very interesting also is your relationship with your family now, because I think that's also maybe a misconception or a conception in general that if someone leaves an Orthodox community like this, then they probably have to like cut every relationship with all their family, with all their friends. How did that happen to you? How was that for you, and how is it now?
Yes. So I just to back up a drop, I'll say that my first book, my academic book, deals with this a lot. This is a key empirical finding from my academic research that, contrary to sort of popular conception and even a lot of academic literature on the topic, seems to imply that if people grow up in the ultra-Orthodox community and then they leave it, they're completely separated from their family. And my research interviewing 74 men and women who grew up in the Lubavitch or Satmar Hasidic communities found that that was not the case at all. And then in terms of my own story, my own experience, in a sense, is very much in line with my academic findings. So my own experience is also a case of being deeply connected with my family even after I left the Lubavitch community. Now, I should hasten to add that both in terms of my research and in terms of my own experiences, I'm not trying to sugarcoat it and present a kind of rosy picture. Oh, people leave and everything's just fine. No, it's very, very complicated and could be very painful dealing with one's Lubavitch family after one is no longer Lubavitch. So I'm not trying to present this kind of rosy picture. The point is, though, that people are still connected often, not always, but often are still connected with their family even after they leave. In my case, I feel very fortunate, really very blessed that again, notwithstanding the painful experiences I went through leaving the Lubavitch community, and dealing with members of my family, especially my mother, who was kind of like the defender of the faith within the family, which caused a lot of kind of emotional complications. I'm glad that eventually, after years of this kind of tug of war, we were able to come to a place where we love each other and we're able to be with each other and enjoy each other's company, even though we have profound religious differences.
Thank you so much. And just one last question from me, and then I'll read our questions. I think another very interesting topic is that people may think that if you leave the Lubavitch community, then you probably leave being Jewish. But that was not your case either. So I find it very interesting that you stayed Jewish and you married the Jewish person and you are still, at least how I read it in the book, or it was a process at least to find what level of and what kind of Judaism is for you and how you approach your Judaism. So I think that's just if you can speak a bit about that too.
Sure. So it's true that definitely a lot of people who grow up in the ultra-Orthodox community and leave it, a lot of them do feel that they've experienced too much trauma and too much pain from their religious community that they just want to disengage. They don't want to be connected to any kind of organized Jewish community. Either because they feel that they're kind of allergic to Jewish communities, or in some cases, especially in terms of like, let's say, more liberal or progressive Jewish denominations, they sometimes feel like the ultra-Orthodox community itself, oh, those communities are fake. That's not real Judaism. So I talk a lot about this in my academic book that I think of this as an example of kind of perpetuating the very negative attitudes towards non-Orthodox Jewish communities and non-Orthodox forms of Judaism that are so prevalent within the ultra-Orthodox community itself. So people leave the ultra-Orthodox community, they change so many aspects of their identity and their lifestyle, but they often hold on to this kind of prejudice against non-Orthodox forms of Judaism. In my case, I was very lucky. I think in part because I ended up having some really powerful experiences when I was in college, through different summer programs where I was able to actually meet non-Orthodox Jews my own age and just, connect to them on a kind of human level and realize how deeply committed they were to their faith and to their community, even though they weren't Orthodox. And even the phrase, like I used to say, like I used to equate religion, like being religious, with being Orthodox or ultra Orthodox. So I remember once I told one of these Reformed Jews, "Well, you're not religious, something." And she got very upset at me and she said, "What are you talking about? Of course I'm religious. I'm just not Orthodox." I said, "Oh, wow. That's a really good point." So even on the level of language, it took a while for me to kind of get with the program. But I think these were really positive and kind of powerful experiences of connection and community within non-Orthodox Judaism. So yes, now from when my wife and I got married, my wife grew up Jewish but not Orthodox and very Jewish at that. And so we committed to being a part of a non-Orthodox synagogue, and we've been connected to non-Orthodox synagogues ever since. We have two daughters. They were both raised in these synagogues. They both had their bat mitzvahs. We provide them at home with kind of robust Jewish education so that even though they're not Orthodox, they have a very deep sense of the Jewish tradition and their place in it.
Thank you so much. So I will start reading questions. I see that there are many from the audience, so we can try to go through them, in as much detail as you wish. But just keep in mind that there are many. The first question is, what is your level of kashrut now?
Right. So this is an issue because often when I meet, well, it doesn't happen every day, but when I talk to some ultra-Orthodox Jews, then they see me and they get to know me a drop in person and they hear my voice and what have you, and they say, "Oh wow, like you sound so Orthodox," you know? And I say, "Well, I'm really not Orthodox." And they say, "Well, like, do you keep kosher?" I say, well, our own kind of kosher. We keep a certain kind of kosher. We have, two sets of dishes, but we don't do things exactly the way that my parents do or Orthodox Jews do. And they say, oh, okay, you see, look, you're keeping kosher, you know. So the point is, I think it's all a matter of perspective, you know. If you look at it from the ultra Orthodox perspective, you'll definitely say that is not really keeping kosher. Um, and I'm perfectly aware that ultra Orthodox Jews would feel that way. In fact, the few times that my parents have come to visit us in our home, they brought not only all of their own food, but they also brought their own tablecloths. They also brought their own plastic utensils and plates and cups and so on, making it very clear that they did not think that whatever we were doing kosher wise, amounted to a hill of beans, So, like, I understand that, and that's fine at this point with years of therapy and time to reflect. I'm perfectly okay that everyone is able to have their own view of what is proper for them and their family, what is considered kosher enough, and so on. And I'm okay with all that. We're doing what makes sense for us, for my wife and me, for our kids, and we're very happy doing that.
Thank you. Where, when, and how did you start to obtain secular education?
So, um, I mean, it was really through this kind of book reading, that was my entry point to secular education, secular knowledge. And it started in my kind of mid-teens, and it picked up pace pretty quickly. And then eventually, I was in yeshivas and religious schools um, from when I was a kid till my early 20s, and let's say 20 or so. And so let's say from when I was 15 to when I was 20, I was just reading these quote unquote Goyish Bicher, these non-Jewish books, which ironically were often written by, for, and about Jews, but they were considered Goyish or not Jewish or not kosher because they had a kind of secular outlook. And so I was reading them eventually most of the day while I was in yeshivas. So I would essentially show up to the study sessions, make sure that I got marked for attendance, and then I would kind of slip out and go up to my dorm upstairs and just sit there for hours and hours reading my own curriculum. You could read a lot. I mean, you could learn a lot if you spend hours and hours and hours every day just reading books. Like you really could learn a great deal. Even though I do have a lot of sort of gaps in my education because I wasn't following any formal curriculum. I wasn't reading textbooks. I was just reading the whatever books I could get my hands on. So it was definitely unsystematic and left tons of gaps, but it was deeply compelling reading, deeply enriching, and I loved it.
I thought it was very interesting, actually, in your book when you mentioned that you have to start studying math to enter university, and that you were fine with English because you read so much, but then you have to study the basics of math. And actually, the next question is somewhat related to something you mentioned. You mentioned that the even though books written by Jews about Jewish topics, they were still considered goyish. And there is a question whether the Hasidic community accepts non-Hasidic Jewish people or Christians who have converted to Judaism as Jews.
Right. So definitely, this is an issue, a very important issue within the Lubavitch community because of their outreach activities. Um, this is a very important issue. So definitely, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, had made it very clear that from his perspective, anyone who is born to a Jewish mother or converted according to Orthodox Jewish conversion, they are absolutely Jewish and they're as Jewish as any other Jew. They're as Jewish as Moses, what have you. And that's the basis really of the Lubavitch outreach activities. Like there'd be no point of doing all of these Jewish outreach activities if they didn't feel that the people that they were encountering were quote unquote really Jewish and worth their time to try to bring them closer to Orthodox Judaism. So, so definitely that's the perspective within the Lubavitch community.
Thank you. Can you explain where the name Lubavitch and Chabad come from?
Sure. So Lubavitch is a geographical name. It comes from the city of Lubavitchy in Russia. Uh, as with most other Hasidic communities, the name of the community typically refers to the a geographical location where in Europe where the community was founded, or where a location that played a pivotal role in the history of that group. So Lubavitch comes from Lubavitchy, Satmar, the Satmar community comes from Satumari in Hungary, and so on. Chabad is an acronym for three Hebrew words, Chachma, Bina, and Das, which are three kinds of understanding. There are three aspects of the kind of Kabbalistic powers of God, and they're also thought of as being a part of the human faculties, that everyone has these mental capacities. And essentially, the idea of calling the community by that name is to highlight the fact that the Lubavitch attitude or approach to God is very much based on a kind of intellectual understanding of God and a need to approach God intellectually as well as emotionally and spiritually. Functionally, today, both names, Lubavitch and Chabad, refer to the same community.
Thank you. Do Lubavitchers serve in the IDF?
Sometimes. So historically, not really. As with most other ultra-Orthodox Jews who live in Israel, they, for various reasons, they wouldn't serve in the IDF. More recently, there definitely been some ultra-Orthodox Jews, including Lubavitchers, who have served in the IDF.
Thank you. The next question is again about your family, that your parents were highly educated and you did not receive secular education. So was there any clash in that inside you or in your family?
Right. So right. People are often surprised. Like, how could it be? Your father's a doctor. Your mother is a college graduate. Your mother's father had two PhDs. How could it be that they didn't give you a secular education? And again, it's often kind of framed as like, didn't your parents love you? Like, why would they want to hurt you in this way? And I often, I always emphasize that I absolutely never doubted that my parents loved me and always felt loved by my parents. And I came to understand that even this question of whether to provide or the decision to not provide secular education to their sons was very much from a place of love, and that, like any parent, they try to raise their children in a way that they thought would be best for their children, that this would provide the greatest promise of a happy life. It's just that they prioritized what they saw based on the teachings of the Lubavitcher Rebbe as the spiritual growth and development and purity of their children rather than their physical or professional prospects. And so, I think that was kind of how they came to that decision. As for me, it was definitely ironic that my parents, especially my father, was so, highly educated, and I could barely string, um, you know, a couple of words together in English on paper. I was always able to speak English, but I wasn't able to write in English. I couldn't spell to save my life. Um, and there's always a kind of odd thing, but I don't know. I guess I feel like I just didn't really, for the most part, kind of focus on how could they have done this to me? How could they have put me at this disadvantage. I just thought of it, I think, in a more kind of pragmatic way. Well, this is the situation. I can't read, and if I want to get on with things, I better learn how to read.
Thank you. Actually, there was a question, what language did you speak at home?
So we always spoke English because it's the only language that my parents really know. Because they're Bali Tshuva, because they joined the community from the outside, they don't know Hebrew, and they don't know Yiddish. They know a few words, but essentially the only language they know is English. So that's the language that they always spoke at home, and that's the language that all the children spoke at home.
And how many languages do you speak? That was also another question.
Really well. I'm working on English. But I also speak Yiddish and Hebrew, although Hebrew meaning like biblical Hebrew, not Ivrit, not modern Hebrew. But I know Yiddish. I could read. Let's put it this way. I could read Yiddish, Hebrew, and Aramaic, which Aramaic, the language of the Talmud.
Thank you. How did you manage to schlep several cartons of non-kosher books from yeshiva to yeshiva without getting caught?
Well, the tricky part wasn't the schlepping so much. The tricky part was what happened once you landed at the new yeshiva. Where do you store or stow the books so that you don't get caught? And that was definitely a challenge. And eventually, I, developed an eye for good hiding spots in my dorm, in the closet, behind a bunch of boxes, in the ceiling, the drop ceiling, and so on, always trying to look for spots that would be unlikely to be checked out by the rabbis who occasionally did do kind of spot checks to see what people were hiding. For the most part, they weren't hiding, copies of Dickens, but whatever.
So in theory, we are at the end of the time, but we still have many questions. Do you still have a bit more time to answer, or how are you doing?
Why don't we take one more question? That'd be good.
Okay. What did your parents and siblings think about the direction you took?
They were not thrilled. Definitely not. So I talk a lot about this in the memoir because I think that aside from the kind of pain from the initial rejection, especially by my parents, especially when I shaved my beard, which is the first kind of visible sort of official act of rebellion, stating very clearly, "Hey, I'm no longer, you know, part of the Lubavitch program or not following the Lubavitch program quite the way I used to." And so there was a very kind of harsh reaction to that. But afterwards, again, we tried for years to kind of patch up our relationship and grow as a family so that we're able to be in contact with each other and that we're able to stay connected to each other in a meaningful way notwithstanding all of our religious differences. And I'm again, I feel really very blessed, very lucky. I think some of it has to do with me. Some of it certainly a great deal of the credit goes to my parents and my siblings. That I think we've all managed over the years to kind of create space for each other. Again, it's not that we, everything is simpatico and we're all totally on the same page. There's real differences between us. At the same time, we manage to stay connected to each other, I think for me, the most important thing is that we manage to really enjoy each other's company. I have a friend. Who left the Lubavitch community, and I mentioned to him recently, "Oh, I'm going to see my family. We're going to hang out," and he said, "Like, why? Like, why would you do that? I mean, aren't you just opening yourself up to feeling rejected and disowned and judged and whatever?" And I said, no, I don't feel that way at all. Like I love my family. I genuinely enjoy being with them. I think they're tremendous amount of fun. It's very exciting. We have, 20 some odd grandchildren. There's always kids running around. It's a very exciting place to be. And there's a tremendous amount of warmth and love. And I always enjoy being around them, even though we have real religious differences.
Thank you so much. There are so many other questions. I see that people are super interested in your story and in the topic. So I just really want to encourage people that if you are interested, please do read Zalman's book because I think he really re answers many of the questions that are being asked here now in the chat. He gives so much more detail about everything that we just kind of like touched up on some main topics that come up in the book, but he really reflects internally and in many different ways and aspects to these questions. So if you're curious, I think it's a very good read to start with understanding this world and how it is to leave this world. So thank you so much everyone for joining us and for your questions and curiosity. And thank you, Zalman, very much for sharing your story with us and answering all our questions so openly and without hesitation. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to meet you all, get to see you all, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. We hope to see you all very soon, and we wish you a wonderful rest of the day. And of course, as always, we'll send out this recording tomorrow and also the link to the book and where you can buy both of Zalman's book or find out more. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the day.